Elevation Nation. I hope you are hungry and excited to learn about a topic that Parker knows I am super passionate about, something I'm interested in learning more, all about our food, sustainability, agriculture, and really just how to have a career path in entrepreneurship, public speaking, and paving your own path as a young adult. We have on a special guest, the co-host. We only have one of two of the hosts of the Discover AG podcast. We're going to get into that story because it's a little bit fun why we only are blessed with Tara Vander Dussen tonight and not Natalie, her co-host. But Tara, we are so excited to have you join officially Elevation Nation and share your story with our community. Thank you for joining us.
I am so excited to be here. So excited to share. I was telling you guys off air that I've had a very unconventional journey in my career path, and I'm excited to talk with you guys about it. And yes, my wonderful co-host, I am so bummed that she is not here, but she's a cattle rancher in Nebraska, and unfortunately they were out at summer pasture moving cattle, and their UTV got stuck, and they are waiting on the tractor to come and pull them out. And so she did not make it to the podcast tonight, unfortunately.
Yeah, we will miss her, and it's something that I honestly would never even think of, getting stuck on a ranch. I mean, I live in New York City. I don't think I even see any ranches nearby anywhere around. But Tara, it's great to meet you. It's great to have you on Elevation Nation, and I love to talk about all of the things that have gotten you to where you are today. But first, it is Elevation Nation. We start every single podcast the same. We ask every single elevator what their elevator pitch is. We would love for you to share who you are.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sounds good. I'll do it for the podcast. So as you said, I'm co-host of a podcast called Discover, and our tagline is where food news meets pop culture. So we are bringing you all of the top trending news articles in the ag and food space, but with a twist, a pop culture, trendy millennial twist.
And I'm excited to dig a little bit more into that. I know we just discussed briefly Natalie is obviously not joining us, so I know she's going to be listening. And Natalie, we're excited to hopefully represent you well on this podcast, and I can't wait to connect again soon. So Tara, we're really interested in the food space. Parker just mentioned he's in New York City. I'm in Washington, D.C., and I guess it shows a little bit, and I'll just be honest here, the bubble that we grew up in. I don't know if I've ever really had a full-on conversation with someone in the agriculture space and a farmer before, and I'm sure that's part of the reason and the inspiration behind both of your journeys to where you are now and why you wanted to really create content around agriculture. Can you tell me a little bit about your journey and how you kind of, I guess, stumbled, but really climbed and elevated into what you're doing now today?
Yeah, so it's like I said at the very beginning, very unconventional. I'm a fifth generation dairy farmer, so pretty much the opposite of you. I live in an agriculture bubble, a farming bubble, where all I do is hang out with people who are in agriculture, it feels like. My husband is also a fifth generation dairy farmer, so we had very similar upbringings, just very immersed in dairy farming lifestyle. I mean, my backyard is literally our milking barn and our close-up cows, if you can only imagine. So I actually, though, it was a very classic small town kid. And I was like, I'm going away to college. I went to a college where I didn't know a single person. And I was like, I'm never coming back to the farm. So I got my degree in environmental science. And long and behold, started dating my husband, moved back to his family farm. And when, had this degree in environmental science that I kind of had to figure out what to do because I had seen myself, either going on to law school or moving to a larger city and maybe being an environmental consultant for a large company. And so ended up getting a job as a consultant, an environmental consultant for dairy farms. So dairy farmers have to have a lot of permits and regulations and all these things like back end of the dairy that they have to do. And so I basically assisted dairy farmers with environmental and sustainability projects. At the same time, obviously, social media was blowing up. I mean, the year I graduated from college was pretty much the launch of Instagram. And I was, being introduced to a whole new world online, essentially, that was outside of agriculture. I still had my friends from college that were not involved in ag. And I was seeing what they were posting and doing and questions that they had. And I led me to just start sharing online, open up our dairy farm to people who maybe had questions about agriculture. And from there, it absolutely snowballed, tumbled, rolled down a hill into something completely different, where now my full-time job is podcasting, and where I, again, share about agriculture through podcasting.
Insane. I love it. It's so, in Sam and I's bubble, very obviously unique. So I'm so excited to get more into this. Okay, so back when you were working in your consulting job, there's an inflection point where you're like, wait, this social media thing's buzzing and I have to make that decision. Is there like a specific story where you were like, you know what? I want to go this other route and not work in the quote unquote corporate world anymore?
Yeah, so I always, worked for that company. My husband does day-to-day on our dairy farm operations, just to give you a little picture, I guess, of our lifestyle. And, I was seeing more and more misinformation online about dairy, but specifically about dairy and its impact on the environment. And I just kept ending up like in the comment section of Facebook, which is not a place anyone ever
Not a
wants
place
to hang
you want to
out.
go. Yeah.
Terrible place to be. But I was like trying to tell people, that's actually not true, or that's not the whole picture. Or I wish you could see our farm, or, and I just found myself kind of there. And so I had been in the back of my mind thinking about sharing and starting a blog. And, as like kind of life would have it, we actually had a massive blizzard, we do not get snow very often. We had like a once in a lifetime blizzard. And I shared a post on social media and it just absolutely went viral. Like, from my personal Facebook page, I think it ended up being shared like 40,000 times in the matter of, 24 hours. And I was being interviewed by news people and just, all over the place. Just kind of one of those moments. And it was kind of like sink or swim, right? Like now or never, jump in both feet first. And so that day I sat down, created a very simple website, a free website on like WordPress, and was like up and running by the next morning with being able to share on the blog as well as through social media. And so that was really kind of, I feel like I just jumped off into the deep end with sharing on that day.
What was the article about? The blizzard?
Actually, it was an open letter to, we had like a lot of maybe like animal activists kind of saying like we didn't care for our cows. So it was an open letter to like how I wish people could see like the care that, my family, my brothers, my dad, my husband were taking for the cows. It was blizzard conditions. My husband left, I think, at like 3 a.m. in the morning. I didn't see him for 48 hours, didn't talk with him. He slept at the dairy. He was, making sure the cows were getting fed, making sure they had water. So it was just an open letter kind of expressing like my feelings of how I wish people could see the agriculture I get to see, instead of the agriculture people see maybe in the news, of like these really incredible stories of what dairy farmers did to, and not just dairy farmers, ranchers, all the people in our area, what they did to really protect and take care of their animals. And so that was the post. That was the post that did it.
So, I absolutely love that. And I think your reasoning for wanting to share your message and your perspective, and bear with me, is so aligned with why Parker and I started. Of course, in very different realms and professions. But one of the reasons Parker and I started Elevation Nation was we saw on Instagram and social media so many young adults our age pretending that their lives were awesome and going down to Puerto Rico and going on vacation and everything looking beautiful and totally fine, and painting these dream perfect pictures of their first days on the job or graduating from college and having that dream career and everything figured out. And I remember I was in New York at the time. I had just started my corporate career as a consultant, not a little bit different than your consulting, but a consultant nonetheless in the corporate world. And I was scrolling through, doom scrolling as they call it, seeing all my friends seem to be like perfectly happy, like going out to dinner, doing their thing. And I was like, is everyone else happy except for me? Like, did I miss some class in college that taught me how to love this job? Because I'm not liking it right now. And so I called Parker, and we ended up talking to a ton of our friends and realizing that what we were seeing was not necessarily the truth. And I think that's one beautiful thing that social media and podcasting has allowed all three of us, and four, including Natalie as well, to share our perspectives and our point of view on what we're really experiencing every single day. So I love that you guys are really bringing your stories to the forefront, because I think there's no better way to just learn a different perspective than through someone who's living it themselves.
No, absolutely. I feel like so much on social media is just a snapshot, whether that is like the highlight reel, like what you're talking about, of people being like, I love my job. And you know what's so funny is you may follow 1,000 people. And so maybe 3 people a day post something fantastic that happened in their year. But if you follow 1,000 people, that's 3 people every single day that you're saying, like, they're having the best day of their life. And you're like, I'm not having the best day of my life. And with agriculture, though, it's really similar. You're seeing, you'll see misinformation about, farms or ranches or whatever. And it's like a 9-second reel. And you're like, agriculture is 365 days a year. You cannot capture what is happening in anyone's life in a 9-second reel. And so it's like peeling back those layers and like diving a little deeper into what's actually going on.
So let's talk about how you're peeling back those layers a bit. So you got the podcast. I assume you continued that website or the blog in some form.
Which, by the way, both of your websites, I
Killer.
web design for a living, for my real
thank
job.
you.
Crush
They rock. So yeah, we'll link to them in the show notes because they are beautiful.
Thank you so much.
So let's talk about that. So you guys post your podcast, all the time. You talk about, unique trends in the industry and whatnot, and your guys' take and flair on the millennial style for it. Obviously, you have the blog post. So, like, this year in particular, like, what is a trend that has been exciting for you guys to talk about?
Yeah, so you know what's so fun about the way we do it is since we cover news, every week gets to be something so different. But I will say one theme that we've noticed big time, and this is actually one of the reasons like we ended up in the podcasting space, was because we were seeing this online and we kind of wanted to jump on it in a new platform. But I feel like a lot of people are just like the pendulum is swinging back to people being really curious about where their food comes from. And so people just have genuine questions and they want to connect with farmers and ranchers, and maybe they're not sure exactly how. They want to know more about their food. You think about the boom of farmers markets and all of that just kind of like cultural moment that's happening. And so with the podcast, we're just trying to like bring people in. It's like, hey, you guys want information? Like, we want to provide it with you. And so I guess maybe that's the overall trend that makes me so excited about this year and moving forward, is just people's like hunger, pun intended, for wanting to know where their food comes from.
And I certainly fall into that category. I think it all started in health class in high school. They had us watch Food Inc., which, again, I'm not sure. There's certainly a ton of information out there, and I'm not sure how representative or how much you guys agree with. But that really opened my eyes to like a thought that is silly, but I've never had before as a young kid, which was, where am I getting all this stuff from the grocery store? And that kind of sparked into a few different books that I read, Omnivore's Dilemma by Michael Pollan being one of them, and a few more of some of his books around food. And I remember having this moment watching Food Inc. and learning about, I believe there was a farm in Virginia outside, and they followed it, and they brought some special kind of food into DC for specific people. And it was way more expensive, but you knew exactly where it was coming from. And I remember at one point thinking, when I'm rich and successful, I want to be able to do that. What a sad reality that I kind of equate to organic, natural, like food, the food chain of where it comes from, being like a privilege for people that are wealthy. You guys experience that? And is that a myth that I have, or is that unfortunately how the food system is for a lot of Americans in cities?
Yeah, I love your story, actually. So a fun thing we did last summer, I'll answer your question, but a fun thing we did last summer was we took a lot of those Netflix documentaries, as well as some of the like smaller, lesser known films about agriculture, and we like broke them down. Like, we brought on nutritionists, we brought on a bunch of different experts to kind of help us go through it. Like, we did Seaspiracy, so we brought on someone from that was spearfishing, because that's we were fish out of water in that entire movie, that we didn't know the facts either. We were much like you, that we were like, oh my gosh, should I never eat seafood again? And so we brought on really great experts. So if you are into those documentaries, go back on Discover Ag and look at those and check them out, because that is where a lot of people are at. They've watched something like that, then it's kind of led them down some rabbit holes where they're like, okay, now I have questions. Now I have a lot of questions. Like, where does this keep going? And I think one thing that Natalie and I have been exploring a lot recently, we actually spoke at South by Southwest this March, and we'd like to go back and speak again next fall on this topic, that I think one of the things that gets lost is the actual like food industry. I feel like sometimes all of food gets lumped together, whether it is food industry or farmers. And I always kind of like think about the grocery store as, the outside of the grocery store and then like kind of the inside of the grocery store. And there's really great foods on the inside of the grocery store too, don't get me wrong. But like the outside is more what I think of comes like directly a lot of times from a farm or ranch, right? Like it is a carrot that is grown in the ground. It is a gallon of milk that is just a gallon of milk that basically comes from my farm straight to the grocery store. Then you have like the portion of the grocery store where, companies take the food that is produced at a farm and like turn it into a more of like a packaged good. And so, I always like just believe in like whole foods. Like to me, if you are getting a steak, if whether it is a steak at the grocery store or it is a steak that you're getting directly from a farmer or rancher, like they're both really great options. I think it's incredible when you can support a farmer and rancher and buy directly from them. Like that's such a hard job for that farmer and rancher to do. Like not only now are they farming and ranching, but now they're marketing a product, they're selling a product, they're doing all these extra things. So it's incredible when someone can do that. But like the prime steak at the grocery store can also be an amazing choice. And so sometimes that's how I like to think about it. Yes, there are differences. Then you can get into, an organic steak or an organic gallon of milk and like go up from there. But to me, those whole foods are just, really phenomenal no matter where you're getting them.
Sometimes I'm in the supermarket and I feel like I don't necessarily know if I'm getting it, let's say, directly from a farmer, or it's going through one company, then another company, and then another company. Because I could read the label and it could seem like it's coming from, I guess, the farm to the supermarket. But I know in reality that's not always the case, right?
Yeah, labels are such a funny thing. I mean, I think labels started out with a really good goal of being transparent, telling consumers about the product. And Natalie and I talk so much about labels. It's actually part of what our South by Southwest speech was on this year, was labels. But I feel like somewhere they got lost along the way. And now they're a lot more of like a marketing, tactic than really information. It's like sometimes there'll be labels that will tell you something and it's like, every product on the shelf like that does that too, but they'll slap that label on it because it makes it look that much better or more appealing than the product next to it. So it can be really, really frustrating. So you do have to kind of like look at them. If there are certain things that are really important to you, a lot of times I heard a quote that says, if you tell me what's important to you about your food, I'll tell you how to shop. And so I think that's some things like, are you looking for a budget friendly option? Are you looking for that direct to consumer option? Like, what exactly are you looking for? Are you looking for only in the United States, that you're only wanting to buy products in the United States? Like whatever it is, kind of like have that going to the grocery store and then kind of like look for those because otherwise it can be extremely overwhelming. Like there's just 1,000 labels. But there's some really cool things too. I'll talk about milk because I'm a dairy farmer, so I'm kind of a nerd about milk. But one of my favorite facts about milk is that the milk you see in the grocery store typically comes from a farm less than 100 miles away from that grocery store. And it takes less than 48 hours to get from my farm to the grocery store. So people don't think, like you think about food traveling such a far distance, and sometimes that's not the case. Sometimes it's literally from a farm down the road. And, people, those are the things I wish people knew, that are just really fascinating about our food system.
And I think you're spot on. Many people don't know that. And I love that you are on a mission to help empower people just to have education. You said, what are your goals when it comes to your food? And I think the biggest thing that people want right now is just to be more educated. We are so, our heads buried in the sand that we don't even know what we want. We don't even know what decisions are right for us. And I think you guys are on a perfect path to help. I'll speak for the young people that listen to this podcast, us as we start to become, Parker just got married like 2 weeks ago, like husbands and fathers. And we want to make these decisions for our family that are best. And I think you're exactly right. Labels over time have evolved. Our parents' generation certainly shopped one way. And I think I'm optimistic as well that as there's more interest in our food chain, that people will become more informed about where their food comes from.
Yes, so
Go ahead, Tara.
A fun fact about Natalie and I, like we technically aren't really like selling you anything on our podcast. Like we don't have a direct to consumer product at all. So one of our big things with our podcast is actually just genuinely food choice. We want exactly what you said. Go into the grocery store and you feel confident in whatever decision you are making. You have the information. We've given you, some research and we've had some conversations on our podcast that maybe you've been able to take away. And you do feel more confident when you go to the grocery store, no matter what that choice is, even if it's different than and our choices. We just believe in people having the knowledge to make informed food choice decisions.
I had a conversation with someone who we're bringing into Elevation Nation 2 later this summer, and I'm really excited about it. He has a company that's all about creating organic products that mimic what's in the supermarket in a sense. And so he was like, just tell me about his mission and the story behind why he went all in on this and whatnot. And he said that back like 70 years ago, people spend about 30% of their income on food. And nowadays, people spend less than like 15% of their income on food. And so people are willing to spend less now because the options for cheaper food have become so much more prevalent. But we know what happens with cheaper food, right? Is maybe it's not necessarily as good for us, or it's not coming from the place that we necessarily thought it was. And I thought that, like, what has happened where people were like, yeah, we're willing to spend more on food. And maybe it's like a big corporation thing taking over, economies at scale. I don't know. I just think it was such an interesting trend that got me so thinking about way people, think about how they spend on food.
We've been actually talking a lot on our podcast about that exact thing. You can say a lot of things about the United States food system, but we do have an abundant, affordable food system. And I think sometimes we take that for granted with there are problems, there are things we need to fix 100%. But that is two things that we have done, very well, as we as a country spend the least amount on food compared to any other country. Whether that's good or bad, that's individual decisions. But one thing we have found is a lot of times people will say that they are willing to pay more for X, Y, and Z. And when they get to the grocery store and the dollar hits the pavement at the grocery store, they do not always come through with that. And so it is hard, I think, once you get used to having a certain amount of your income dedicated to one thing, like food, then you dedicate, other pieces of your income to someplace else. And it's hard to reverse that trend. And it has to be, I think, a very conscious decision for people to say, I am going to spend more for this product or that product. Natalie and I have even tested that out with some of our ads that we've done. We'll run ads for people to be able to purchase different food choices. And it's at some price point, people are just they can say they want something, but then again, when they really see the numbers, sometimes it can, it hits their bank account, especially right now where we have crazy inflation and just other factors at play that people may not have that disposable income to pay more for food when they have another option to pay, less for food. And so this entire conversation, I'm not an economist, but it is a fascinating conversation of just how we got to where we're at, and if we want to make changes, how we're actually going to get there. And I heard a speaker one time talk about the egg industry, and the egg industry was told that everyone wanted cage-free eggs. And so they invested in all of this cage-free, in habitats for the chickens and everything that goes into that. I'm not in the poultry side of things, so I'm probably saying this all wrong. But he said, the eggs cost more. And at the grocery store, time and time again, people go in and buy the cheapest egg on the shelf. And it's really left the, egg laying industry in somewhat of a predicament that they have now all of these facilities that are cage free that cost more. And yet at the grocery store, people are buying the cheap one, the cheap eggs. And so, where does that leave them? They were told that people wanted one thing, so they did it. And now people aren't actually following through with the dollar amount. And so it's just, I don't think I have an answer, but it's a very interesting conversation.
Again, I mean, there are so many factors at play when it comes to the food industry and agriculture. And I appreciate, Tara, you saying, I'm not an expert in a couple things. I think everyone that listens to Elevation Nation know Parker and I aren't experts in anything. So we're just talking about the struggles that we face and some of the things we're interested in.
Come on.
Are you an expert in something now, Parker?
I like to say I'm an expert in understanding how people elevate, right?
There you go.
Come on,
I'll give
man.
that to you.
Right?
You can have that
Perfect.
one.
Yeah.
But I'm certainly not an economist, so I would agree. I would agree with that point. I think it all really comes back to mindset, Tara, and something that we really stress in Elevation Nation when it comes to just figuring out who you are. We have this concept that we call mental fortitude that we truly believe is something that they didn't teach us in schools, that we are trying to teach young people to help them feel more empowered to be adults. And it really comes down to yourself, knowing who you are, your values, what you care about, your vision, where you want to go, and then your fuel and what gets you there. And bringing that back to what you've taught us so far around agriculture and food is, well, who are you at your core? Are there certain things you maybe don't like to eat or can't eat or go against some of your morals? Your vision of, well, what do you want your food to do for you? Is it just to sustain you and it's kind of an economic burden? Is it a nutrition thing that you're looking for? Is it a peak performance thing? If you're an athlete, where's that vision of food taking you? And what fuels you for these decisions? And I think, again, we use that concept and that framework a lot to help our young people figure out what they want to do with their lives. But I think it's no different and can be applied to making smart and educated food choices as well.
I absolutely love that. I really agree. I don't think I have a ton to add. It was so well said because it's true. It's just food is so personal for people that it is. I think, we have so much of the fear mongering online about what food is safe and what food isn't. And it's like, it's just a very personal thing for one person on the internet to tell someone else what they should or should not be eating is just obviously a massive generalization and just impossible. Like everyone's body reacts different to different foods. This week on the podcast I was talking about we actually talked about camel's milk, and I was saying how a lot of times people in the Middle East and Asia can't digest cow's milk because they didn't have it in their histories. Like you can't have someone on the internet tell you what kind of milk you can drink or not.
Who are we to judge?
Yeah, like they have no idea what even your, history is as far as like your genes. And so it is just kind of wild that we live in this world where, you're scrolling reels and, a reel could be dictating to you what they think you should have for dinner, right? Like it's just a wild world we live in.
And that's why we rely on mental fortitude. And that's why we're trying to help younger people understand that when they look at that video, it's not about what someone else tells you. It's that you get the decision to make the decision for yourself, but you first have to ask yourself those questions. And sometimes those questions are not very easy. And that's where the mental fortitude comes, right? Obviously, it's talking about one piece of food, but, taking it to other pieces too. Cool.
Speaking of food, Parker, before you go
What?
on, I have to tell this story.
Okay, go ahead.
So, Tara, you were mentioning camel's milk, right? Being a normal food in parts of the Middle East. And again, who are we to judge? Parker and I have been lucky to travel to a couple different places together. And the strangest food I've ever had in my life, and I think Parker as well, was in Iceland. They have what is a delicacy for them, which is a piece of shark fermented in its own urine.
Wow.
It's horrible, in my opinion. But like that,
It was
right,
like
for
an
them,
experience. I felt like it wasn't even something that would get me full.
It like made it my entire face numb. It was not okay. But hey, like again, who are we to judge? People have different cultural things when it comes to food, and I think it's amazing that you all are, American farmers teaching us your background and your point of view, but also being so open-minded enough to understand that now through social media, your listeners are all across the world and they might have a different reality. So I commend you guys for kind of teaching what Parker and I like to preach, which is everyone has a different perspective. Use your mindset to figure out what's best for you. So sorry, Parker, I had to tell that story.
Man, I feel like such a loser now. The craziest thing I feel like I've ever eaten is rattlesnake, and that was in Texas, which still
that
feels
sounds
very
pretty
fitting.
crazy.
I mean, that's right up Texas's alley. I mean, Iceland's doing shark and urine, and Texas is doing rattlesnake, but who knows?
Yeah.
Was it like, you don't see it alive, right? At the rattlesnake.
No.
I was gonna say like
It's
that's
fully
crazy.
cooked.
What did it taste like?
It tastes like sausage, pretty much.
Oh, okay. Would you have it again?
Yeah, I probably would. Yeah, I would probably have it again. I don't know. It was fine. I don't know if it wasn't like, I could eat that every day. But I feel like it was like it was kind of like what you said. It was an experience. My face did not go numb, I'll tell you that much. But it was, it was part of being in downtown Fort Worth, right? Like trying what they had to offer.
All right. Sounds good. Let's move to our rapid fire before we wrap up, Tara. So, what comes to mind right off the bat? What's your favorite food fun fact?
Oh my gosh. I have so many fun facts about food. I told you guys the milk one. I should have saved this for now. I feel like it is. This is about farmers, I guess, but I think it's pretty cool. Less than 2% of the population is involved in agriculture at this point in time, and so I think that's pretty cool. That people. You at some point somebody in here said like economies of scale, and that is something that agriculture has experienced as people have not wanted to move to small towns or live in rural, America. We're seeing a shift now, kind of backwards, actually, with remote, work and that kind of thing. But I think it's pretty cool that we are able to feed as many people. I think. When my grandfather was farming, he had to feed 55 people on his farm. And now I think that my husband and I on our farm have to feed just under 200 people to be equivalent, like to be able to feed, the same, if that makes sense, like feed the same amount of a percentage of our population.
That's probably so gratifying. You can go to bed every night and like as crazy as the day has gone, like to think about 200 people are like eating because of the operation that we and the dedication that you guys have put in. That's incredible to think about.
No, it is kind of cool when COVID hit. Obviously, there was, mass chaos as far as what our food system was concerned and people getting milk. And it was my husband and I were, running numbers of like how much our farm, which we're in a big dairy farming area. So if the whole food supply shut down, like our area is going to be drinking a ton of milk. But that's about all you're going to get. Maybe beef and milk, and that's what you're going to be getting. But we were kind of thinking, like, how many people, how many gallons of milk? Because we actually calculate milk in pounds of milk. That's how we sell it. So you don't always think about gallons. And we kind of just sat down and were thinking about how many gallons of milk leave our farm and how many people that would feed. And it was, it just actually putting it in some tangible numbers is kind of cool to actually think about, because sometimes you end up being just as disconnected as you are from ag. Sometimes we're disconnected from where our product ends up as well, and so it's fun to put some numbers to it and think about like the actual people that end up with our product.
Not to talk smack about Parker and our job as consultants, but man, what a fun impact that you are truly feeding a mouth, and Parker and I are making PowerPoint slides. But hey, that's a conversation for when we all get to meet in person.
Hey, speak for yourself, man. Speak for yourself.
Okay.
I mean, I'm a podcaster officially now, so all I do is talk for a living. So that's probably the worst out of the three of us.
I love it. Okay, I'm making an assumption here. Being so close to food and the agriculture system that you might like to cook a little bit for the family. What is your go-to home-cooked meal that your family absolutely loves?
Oh my goodness. So it's actually going to be super simple. Like, I feel like there is nothing better than a good steak. It doesn't need a lot, like, garlic butter as the seasoning on top, a little salt and pepper, like just keeping it so simple is probably my favorite meal. And, then pairing it with, some basics. My brother actually harvested potatoes for the first time this year. So the first thing that comes to mind is, he brought us just massive potatoes that came out, obviously, of his field. So a good baked potato or some kind of potato side dish. And then, you got to have some kind of veggie, which I don't know. I'm not a huge veggie person, so that's like the least important thing on my menu. And then maybe like a solid ice cream, right? Like I have to have a dairy product on there somewhere. So I'll bring in some ice cream at the end, just
Perfect. Gotta plug it.
Yeah, I feel like that meal reminds me of summertime, like husband grilling in the backyard with a steak that came, from our farm, and a potato that came from my brother's farm, and milk in our ice cream that came right out of our tank, like that's just, and people are like, oh, I wish I had that. Funny thing, like we sell to the conventional beef supply and the conventional milk supply. So that plain old gallon of milk that you get at the grocery store, it's from farms just like ours. Like that's what's in my fridge right now.
That makes me feel better. Thank you. Because I was like, I do want that. How do I get that? Okay.
My milk
Maybe
that
I'm
I
not
make
too
that
far
ice
off.
cream with is straight out of, grocery store down the street.
That's true. I mean, I probably pretty cool for your brother to, harvest potatoes
That is
and
cool.
be like,
That is cool.
here you go. This is my first time. What do you think of it? And you're like, yeah, it's pretty good.
Yeah. Getting a giant box of potatoes delivered was pretty cool.
That's awesome. Well, real quick, what is the go-to cut of meat then? Cut of steak?
Oh, I love a filet. And
Okay.
I know people, I
Less
feel like there's going to
fatty,
be like
right?
cattle ranchers out there just dying and they're like, they want a ribeye or something. I love that prime cut of filet mignon.
Not my favorite, but it's good. I'll never deny it.
okay.
I'll never deny it. I'm the ribeye guy.
Yeah, I knew it. I knew I was offending someone.
Yeah.
I'm biting my tongue because I have an incredible story with Parker and steak that actually made it into his wedding speech that involved him choking and almost dying. But we all do love steak now. I think it made us love steak even more. So that's okay. We still love you,
chew
Parker.
uncooked steak, especially when you don't cut it the right way.
No, chew it, and so you don't choke on it.
That's true.
What you're
Just
saying.
spit it out at that point because it's not gonna, go down. Okay, last rapid fire, Tara. What's your go-to book recommendation for Elevation Nation?
Oh my goodness. Okay. I did really like Green Lights, which I know people may feel differently, but I just thought it was really for business. There is times where you just feel like you have a red light, and there are times where you feel like you have a green light. And that motto was really helpful for me. I also, second runner up is the book Outliers. I have kids, so I found it fascinating, like what makes someone be an outlier in something. And sometimes it's powers beyond your control, or sometimes it's things that if you know what those powers are, like how can you manipulate them to like work for you better. So both of those are tied, I feel like, for me.
Two incredible books that we've both read, so we love those. If anyone hasn't read Green Lights, this is your green light to go do it. It's a great book. It's fantastic.
You'll read it in like
Tara,
a day. It's a page
I
turner.
zoomed through it.
And if you do the audiobook, Matthew McConaughey actually reads it, and I feel like he does a really great job at the audiobook.
Yeah, there's not many voices that are cooler than his reading his own words.
Definitely.
That's for sure. So, Tara, this has been incredible. Again, I think, when we first met, we were probably both racking our brains of, well, what are we going to talk about with an agriculture podcast and a podcast for young adults and their mindset? But I can truly say that this has been an absolute pleasure, and I'm so glad that we got to learn a little bit more about your world, and thank you for taking the time to really educate Elevation Nation and a lot of young people that are really curious about where their food comes and what life is like outside of our comfort zone. So thank you for sharing that. I want to end with something that every single elevator that joins Elevation Nation has. And Natalie, we will get yours another time because you are an honorary elevator as well. We hope you got unstuck from your fields. So Tara, we want to ask you, what is your mental motto?
Well, you are in luck because Natalie and I we run our business together, obviously, and have a very similar one. So I actually text her and said,
Beautiful.
You can't make it. I want to make sure I have your motto and that it aligns with mine. And so this is ours. It is fortune favors the brave. And sometimes both Natalie and I have felt like there's been times in our business, whether it's the podcasting or whether it's in farming and ranching, where you have to be brave enough to try. You have to be brave enough to be something different. Natalie was a pharmacist and I was an environmental consultant. When we both quit our jobs, told our families we were quitting our jobs to go full time to start a business with a person we met on the internet that lives 1,000 miles. I mean, Natalie lives 1,000 miles away from me. And we were brave enough to try, and it changed our lives. And so I think that's my recommendation to people is fortune favors the brave.
What an incredible mental motto. I think it aligns perfectly with mental fortitude. And it reminds me of a book I read, Feel the Fear and Do It Anyway by Susan Jeffers. And that book changed my entire idea of how to be brave. You just got to go do it and fail and face that fear and just go.
I'm definitely adding that book to my book
list
my God. For Natalie and
You'll love it. It's great. It's actually a very quick read too. But I mean, I'm sure this mental motto is worked out pretty well for you guys. I mean, you're doing it, and it's paid a lot of dividends in many different ways. But Tara, I just got to say thank you for joining Elevation Nation. Such a pleasure to welcome you, to spend 38 minutes with you, just talking about your journey and how you are inspired to make a difference in the world every day and continue to elevate. I certainly learned a lot. So just on behalf of Sam, myself, and Elevation Nation, thank you.
Thank you so much for having me on. I appreciate it. Like you said, it was kind of, you're bringing on a farmer to talk with you guys on this podcast, but I appreciate you taking the chance on us, and I really loved the conversation we had.
All right, Elevation Nation, until next week, peace.